Hello and welcome. You're watching Business Plus. I'm Shweta Kothari. We're bringing you stories from the world of business, policy and economy as we wrap up 2023 here on Newsline, bringing you all the movers and shakers, people, corporate startups that were in the news for right or wrong reasons. When we talk about corporates, there is no bigger name than Adani Group. With me in the studio are Karthik Malhotra, Krishna Kumar, gentlemen. Adani Group's story was where we began, where it all began, 24th of January. From that day onward, up until now, Adani continues to be in news.
Oh yes, Shweta. And you know, at this stage, it's difficult to say whether Adani has been in the news for the right or the wrong reasons, because it's one story which has done the full circuit, starting the year on this very, very negative note. 24th of Jan, Hindenburg Research comes out with a report titled How the World's Third Richest Man Pulls Off the Largest con in corporate history, right? So and that really sends the entire Adani Group stocks into
tumbling.
A dizzy. And and initial reports that came out during the year suggested that as much as $150 billion worth of market capitalization of all listed Adani Group stocks were wiped away. But as we come to the end of the year, Adani has actually been able to pare most of those losses already, given whatever has happened in the whole year. Now, what were the charges that Hindenburg Research had framed against Adani Group, right? I think there were two basic problems that Hindenburg Research had identified. One of them was misappropriation of funds, if I'm not mistaken. But I think the more critical one really was this minimum public shareholding, MPS, being violated. So there was this MPS violation by way of which Adani Group and promoters and people linked to the promoters of the Adani Group held more equity in the group than they should have legally. And the second issue coming from the MPS was this whole question of people taking stock price manipulation, people taking short positions or entities taking short positions on Adani stocks and profiting by virtue of doing that. So the year started with Hindenburg Research. SEBI obviously came in. Thereafter, we had the Supreme Court appoint an expert committee to look into the matter and to look into SEBI's own investigations into the matter. The expert committee appointed by Supreme Court did not find any problems with SEBI's investigations. SEBI, on the other hand, hit roadblocks. Out of the 24 issues that SEBI had to investigate, it did complete its investigation in 22 issues, but there were two more issues, and those two issues were about opaque structures that SEBI was hit against, because these were offshore entities not operating in India, and it was difficult for SEBI to penetrate through those opaque structures to understand who is at the top of that value chain, of that food chain, and who has actually ended up making money. And then the next obvious question would be, even if you somehow arrived at who made money, how are they linked to the Adani promoters? So this whole question of short selling, has not yet really been able to come to surface, come to light as far as SEBI's own investigations go. Now, multiple dates, multiple changes, delays, all of them sort of culminating towards the end of the year, where SEBI said it does not need any more time, and it told the Supreme Court that it is ready to go ahead and file its final report and understanding of what really went through. Through the midst of this entire, you also had OCCRP doing its own investigation, Financial Times opening another DRI investigation of 2014, etc.
Well, that merits an entire discussion. Let me quickly get in Krishna as well. Krishna, it wasn't just Hindenburg, because some of the Hindenburg ghosts came back to haunt Adani by the way of an OCCRP report, which is an NGO, which also alleged that some of these opaque structures and identified the people who are behind these opaque structures, which were directly or indirectly linked to Gautam Adani. That was number one. Number two was the Financial Times report, which opened, another can of worms by the virtue of coal price manipulation. Those were two serious reports, two allegations to top the Hindenburg allegations. It's been a tough year for Gautam Adani.
Right. All I can think of is that after all of that talk about from OCCRP to the Financial Times and so many of these publications, and the moment the word came in that Hindenburg's report cannot be taken as gospel of truth.
Yeah.
That's all that the Supreme Court said. You know what happened to the Adani stocks the day after? It made all those Financial Times reports look like absolute child's play. To me, the momentum behind the Adani stocks and the momentum behind people wanting the Adani stocks to not fail was too bigger than anything else that Adani. I mean, the word that I can think of when it comes to Adani is when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. That's what it looks like at the end of it, because let's face it, it's Indians and Indian consumers who are invested in stocks and mutual funds, where mutual funds are invested in Adani stocks, and you wonder about whether your mutual funds are giving you the kind of returns or not. So from a consumer perspective, whatever they thought they lost at the beginning of the year, they've got that back and more by the time the year 2023 rounded out.
At least in some of the stocks.
And that is the Supreme Court saying, right? And then there was another case which was Adani Group wanting to develop a port in Sri Lanka, looking at a US-based lender, and when it goes to the US-based lender, the US FDC says that the Hindenburg Research is inconsequential.
Yes.
So, and that
To
gave
us.
the second, to them for the loan they were giving out.
It was very consequential. Dalal Street
the
and
word
the stocks.
inconsequential became completely consequential for the stocks of Adani Group. So I think Adani Group has pretty much from the month of Jan 24th, when it was, I mean, till 23rd Jan, it was obviously, riding on its 10-year-old wave of stock market highs. And then 24th, when the stocks came crashing down, thereafter, it has more than pared most of its losses, whether it is Adani Enterprises, whether it is Adani Ports and SEZ, whether it is Adani Total, whether it is any of the businesses that Adani Energy, Green Energy, and now look at the fillip that Adani Enterprises is actually going to get by way of green energy. I mean, less than a few weeks ago, the COP28 summit actually ended, and energy transition green energy transition really became the buzzword, and something that the entire group which was participating in COP28 came to agree on, that the energy transition has to happen. And guess who's going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries, or two of the biggest beneficiaries of India's energy transition from fossil to green? It is going to be Adani and it is going to be Reliance. And these two companies, obviously the green verticals of these two large behemoths of corporate India, are absolutely well poised right now to ride on this energy transition wave. So overall, I think it has been a year of ups and downs, but by the time we come to 24th Jan 2024, we might see actually all the losses pared and the Adani Group, sort of stabilized on all fronts. So,
all right.
I think the Hindenburg Research report is done and dusted. We haven't yet seen SEBI's report final.
Well, should we write it off just as yet? Because the Supreme Court order is still awaited, and we don't know whether it's going to be a clean chit or not. I know the commentary looks like they're not taking the Hindenburg allegations very seriously.
Not, in my understanding, Supreme Court is not going to hear the matter of Hindenburg Research versus Adani Enterprises. The matter limited to the Supreme Court, and it has kept its judgment pending in that matter, is only to find out did SEBI do its due diligence. Has SEBI done its job correctly or not? And the Supreme Court has reserved its judgment in that matter up until now. But one way or the other, whenever the Supreme Court judgment comes out, that judgment is actually a judgment on SEBI, on the market regulator, and not specifically on any misgovernance, on misdoing on the part of Adani Enterprises or Gautam Adani. And that is completely SEBI's own investigation, SEBI's own remit. So even if, and a big if here, even if there is some sort of a direct or indirect correlation derived between the top of the food chain of those opaque structures and some historic linkage to the Adani family, one way or another, is perhaps going to move the markets or move the stock a little bit for a day or two. Beyond that, is there going to be a long-lasting repercussion on Adani Group? Sitting in the end of December, awaiting the SEBI report, I doubt there is going to be anything negative happening on Adani.
Right, and that is the story of Adani Group that started on a not so very positive news when it came to the Hindenburg Research report in January of this year. Come the end of 2023, it appears Adani seems to have reversed most of its fortune. Now, the Gautam Adani is back again as one of the richest man, top 30 richest man in the world. And since we are discussing big corporates that made news in 2023, apart from Adani, another big player in the airline business, Go First, continues to be in the news at the end of this year. We are sitting in December of 2023, and Go First doesn't look like it's going to come back anytime soon. A lot has happened by the way of Go First shutting operation, going into insolvency, getting an extension as far as insolvency is concerned, getting some sort of interest by the way of Jindal Power's interest in buying out Go First, then not bidding when it came to the final bidding process. But as of now, Go First not coming back, at least for next 1 month or two in 2024.
First week of February is when the deadline ends,
Right.
Shweta. So, I mean,
either it comes
many
back by
people
then
have
or it
written
doesn't.
off Go First, you being one of them. I'm still trying to take the middle ground, saying that, hey, let's give it its due time, and there might be yet another bidder who comes to surface now in this whole challenge that Go First is inundated with right now by way of insolvency.
Now, SpiceJet says it will submit an offer on the airline post due diligence and hopes to create a viable airline by combining the two entities.
Look, Shweta, I think it definitely makes business sense because SpiceJet in itself has a much smaller market share as compared to the two real big airlines that dominate Indian skies. One, of course, being the entire might of Air India, which includes Air India, Air Asia, Air India Express, as well as Vistara. And the other being Indigo, by far the largest single company when it comes to skies, dominating skies in India. So SpiceJet obviously has a great business case when it comes to buying out an airline which is bankrupt, which is grounded, and take possession of the aircraft, take possession of the staff that Go First continues to have on its books, and by way of doing that increase its own ability to carry more passengers and its own ability to command a much higher market share than it presently does. Where did the issue really start? And I think it came pretty much as a surprise. 2nd of May, we were sitting in office, we were in our newsroom, and this news comes in that Go First has cancelled its flight for the next 3 days. And immediately thereafter,
3 days
the
became
news
5
comes
days,
in.
5 days became 10 days.
Of course, and it's been what, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, 7 months at least so far already, right? Including May, it was 2nd of May. So it's been,
Whoever
it's
named the
been
company
8
Go
months.
First.
Go First.
Go last at the end of the
So
whole
it's
thing.
been 8 months and there is no sign of Go First recovering. Now, where did this issue really stem from? It stemmed from the fact that 50% of Go First, 52 odd aircraft, which is about 26 aircraft, had to be grounded. Why were they grounded? Because they had faulty engines. Who provided
Pratt
these
and
faulty
Whitney
engines?
engines.
Pratt and Whitney provided these faulty engines. Why were these engines not serviced by Pratt and Whitney? Why were these engines not replaced by Pratt and Whitney? That seems to be the bone of contention between Pratt and Whitney and Go First. But the fact of the matter is that by 2nd of May, Go First realized that it cannot continue flying and it cannot continue incurring losses when 50% of its fleet is on the ground. And hence, it decided to voluntarily file for insolvency in the NCLT. NCLT
And that took a lot of people by surprise.
Exactly, it did, obviously. I mean, it is difficult. Airlines is, in any case, a difficult business. It is a capital-intensive business. Every seat that you fly, every pilot who flies an aircraft, every ounce of fuel that goes into the aircraft, every time that the aircraft is not flying, even parked, there is money being spent every second of an airline coming into existence until it goes bankrupt, right? So it's pretty much money being drained down, no matter whether you're flying or whether you're grounded. But the fact of the matter is, Go First, the Wadia Group, the promoters of Go First, decided to push the airline into voluntary insolvency, and then the NCLT admitted it and put a moratorium on Go First. And now, by way of this moratorium, the lessors of the aircraft could not reclaim their aircraft. The engine makers could not come back and pick up their engines or service them for that matter. And in general, whatever dues, and there was a committee of creditors, which included the likes of IDFC Bank and Deutsche Bank and Bank of Baroda and many more, which had lent money to Go First, they could not get their, they could not claim their money back from Go First. So basically, Go First just went into a limbo, awaiting either a bailout by way of a bidder coming in and taking over the airline, or by some way getting the committee of creditors to infuse more money into the airline and getting the airline to fly. Now, it was all going all right given it was already insolvency, but given the whole insolvency process, the story was going fine and there was a hope of recovery. But and that is when the bidding process started, and Naveen Jindal Power was one of the only, in fact, the only bidder who qualified, or the only sort of suitor who qualified to go ahead and bid. but nick of time, 21st November, if I'm not mistaken, was the deadline. Nick of time, Jindal Power did not go ahead with the bid. Why did it not go ahead with the bid? Because the new IBC rules, the Insolvency Bankruptcy Code, had kicked in, and the Delhi High Court had in fact stayed that same judgment and said that under insolvency, under IBC, any airline that goes into IBC will have to conform by the Singapore arbitration of aviation laws, wherein the lessors and the engine makers and the creditors, whoever, can come and reclaim their assets, repossess their assets. And that is when I believe Naveen Jindal and Jindal Power took a back seat, because now if lessors are allowed to take the aircraft back, what does the airline have?
Absolutely.
The airline has
Krishna,
practically nothing.
Absolutely. And the question therefore remains that if there is a suitor, if I may use that word, if there is somebody who's now going to show some expression of interest, what value does Go First offer without the aircraft?
What it does offer is that it has a brand name that's already known in one of the biggest civil aviation markets in the world, and a market that's yet to be fully tapped, a market that's hungry for more and more players to be a part of it, because right now you're talking about an Indigo and a SpiceJet, a few bunch of players who are dominating the market, and the market has got to go so much. So if I were to ask you, you have established systems in place, an airline that was fully functional and running, that went into voluntary insolvency. Let's keep that in mind. This was a call that was in fact appreciated by many, that this airline did not wait for the proverbial shit to hit the ceiling eventually, but went for a voluntary insolvency at the earliest stage. So it's all about making sure that you play by the rules of insolvency and you find ways to infuse more capital into Go First, and more importantly, find ways to come out of insolvency proceedings.
Voluntary insolvency that DGCA did not really appreciate, because there was no time given to people who had already booked a flight with Go First. Now, before we end and move on with this discussion, I want to know what happens next for Go First.
It seems that after formally expressing interest to buy Go First, that is when the due diligence will have to be done by SpiceJet, and it'll really have to look at the books and try and estimate a fair value, and then that fair value will also get negotiated, and the arbiter there is going to be the resolution professional who will try and maximize the value of the airline for a bidder to help the promoters of Go First get as much as they can, juice out as much as they can from the bankrupt airline. But SpiceJet will also have to do its own negotiations after its due diligence and try and find the best value to pick up stake, if not pick up a complete majority stake in Go First.
The Go First saga that has been continuing for a while now is unending. Let's move on to a story that is coming in by the way of a banking or a financial app, the BOB World App, a world app launched by Bank of Baroda, which was in the news for all the wrong reasons. Bank of Baroda, there was an allegation on employees, or rather made by employees, to various newspapers, but more prominently, I remember in the middle of 2023, there comes a news item in Al Jazeera where some of the bank employees had spoken anonymously to Al Jazeera, where they said that we are being told to enroll more and more people on the BOB World app, the Bank of Baroda application, and they found interesting ways to do that. And one of the interesting ways was to get a phone number and link that phone number to an account, and then open an account on the BOB World app, and then de-link it, and then link it to another customer, and then once again start a new account on BOB World app. They were given hard targets, and they found a way to do that, which is a big scam, and it puts this data safety of a lot of customers of Bank of Baroda in question. The Bank of Baroda seemed to have admitted, well, maybe not so much as, yes, we did wrong, but an investigation is now in order.
You're right, Shweta. I think July, if I'm not mistaken, bang in the middle of 2023, July is when this report comes out. And yeah, like you explained, I think what the employees were really doing was, in the back end, they would find a customer, a real customer on Bank of Baroda with a real account number and real money into that account. And in the phone number field in their back end system, they would put a number that is around them, a phone number that is around them, a working phone number which could receive an OTP. So what you would do is you would hard punch that phone number there and download the app or log into an already downloaded app using that phone number, receive that OTP, link the account, tick mark, app downloaded on the back end. Remove that phone number, put the previous phone number back, link that new phone number, your own or a family or relation or friend's phone number, into another account. Tick mark, app downloaded, customer onboarded. So I think a clever, mischievous way of
Extremely.
meeting the targets. But the serious challenge really was that that there was this scam and this fraud going on across multiple branches. It wasn't restricted to one employee or one zone or one bank or one whatever. This was pretty much happening across the board. And initially, Bank of Baroda had denied these allegations and said that, no, we've got nothing to do with it. Our employees haven't done anything like this. But as it progressed, RBI came into picture, and RBI, in fact, told Bank of Baroda to stop onboarding fresh customers. And that is when Bank of Baroda had no choice but to, in some way, in a very measured response, slightly agree to the allegations and said that if there have been any lapses, we are going to fix them. And then as the story progressed, some heads rolled. I think the highest level of head rolling happened at a GM level and nothing beyond that. But I think, yeah, it really brought this whole question of KYC compliance into fore, and it got this whole question of then the RBI, in fact not the RBI, the auditors of Bank of Baroda now trying really hard to get employees across the board to come up with these consent forms of customers
and trace them back,
to customers. So basically customers, the forms where customers have either asked to be onboarded on the app by the bank or the bank employee, or the forms where customers have requested for a phone number change, and that phone number change is actually what led to this entire mess.
All right. So, Krishna, where does the investigation stand at the moment?
Well, at this stage, all I can think of is that the investigations have already proven as to what exactly has gone down. The reason why is sitting here and understanding what exactly did the employees do to make sure that to show and meet their targets. The only fear is that how many other bank employees are doing this to meet their targets when it comes to the digitalization of their own accounts and their own banks and their own digital outreach to customers, Shweta.
All right. So, some sort of acceptance there from Bank of Baroda. But I think eventually, what is a question that bank will have to further discuss, elaborate on, is to what extent people's data was compromised. So if I were a Bank of Baroda employee, Karthik, and if this were to happen to me, I would want to know what other information do bank employees have access to, and to what extent can they tamper with that information? Because this is essentially tampering with the information that I provide to the bank.
I think three broad areas of debate emerged from this entire Bank of Baroda scam. Number one, I think top of the chart there is basically the fact that there has to be layers and layers and layers of protection of customer data. So number one, I think banks across the board, not just Bank of Baroda, and this is where the regulator RBI needs to step in and see what are the processes being followed by all the banks operating in India to ensure that information pertaining to customers should not be accessible to bank employees, and even if it needs to be accessible, it cannot be edited by practically any employee who's sitting behind a desk in a bank. So this is debate number one, which I think needs a very, very stringent sort of new look into. The second issue that really emerges is the fact that targets, sometimes unrealistic as they may seem, need to be measured by people who occupy corner offices. And this is not restricted to the banking industry alone. This is restricted pretty much to every sector, every industry out there, where you need to know that the targets that you're assigning, if they're not realistic, your employees will find clever ways to retain their job. And I think the third equally important aspect that emerges from all of this is that if a scam of this nature unfolds, where does the buck stop? Is a ground level employee, a man sitting behind the desk, or at best the bank manager,
is that enough?
Is that enough for the heads to roll, or does the buck stop at a much higher level?
Absolutely. So Bank of Baroda, the Bob World app scam there, highlighting some grave issues when it comes to regulation of the banking system, but more so people, the information of an average person who is a customer of that bank. Perhaps a larger investigation needs to unfold, but also some measures, some checks and balances that need to be in place to ensure that customer data remains protected. But with that, it's a wrap on this bulletin. Thank you for watching.